The moment I stepped into that courtroom, my daughter laughed, a sharp, scornful sound that echoed off marble walls. My son-in-law wouldn't even look at me. He turned his face away like I was something embarrassing he'd been caught with. But then the judge glanced up from his notes. He froze. His face went pale, bloodless. The bailiff later told me his hand actually trembled as he whispered a name no one in that room had heard in 15 years, the Phoenix. He was staring directly at me. My daughter thought she was silencing an old woman who knew too much. She had no idea she'd just awakened something she couldn't control. But before we begin, click subscribe, like this video, and tell me where in the world you're watching from. We love knowing how far our stories are reaching. Now, let's get back to this story. It began, as these betrayals often do, with a humiliation I was expected to swallow in silence. It was a Sunday brunch at the Bay Harbor mansion, Vanessa and Pulisic's monument to shallow opulence. I sat at the far end of a glass table so long it could have been a runway, surrounded by white leather chairs I was never meant to fill. My daughter and her husband held court like they were royalty receiving subjects. The chandelier in the East Wing needs to be Murano glass, Vanessa said, her voice carrying that entitled sharpness I no longer recognized. Anything less would look cheap. Pulisic didn't even look up from his phone. Whatever you want, babe. Once the Green Bay Resort closes, we'll remodel the whole place. We're talking 9 figures, minimum. This is the deal that changes everything. They spoke through me. Pool renovations, resort projections, charity galas, as if I were a piece of inherited furniture they hadn't decided where to store. I am Jamie Mirren, 72 years old, and I had become invisible in my own daughter's home. Since Benjamin died 3 years ago, my husband, her father, I had done what I thought was right. I sold our brownstone in the city, the one filled with 40 years of memories and stories, and I bought the guest house on this estate. I wanted to be close to Vanessa. I thought it was what Benjamin would have wanted. I thought I was choosing family. My granddaughter, Clara, 11 years old with her father's dark eyes, was the only one who still saw me. She looked down the table, her voice small but determined. "Grandma, will you come to my debate tournament on Friday?" I'm arguing the affirmative. Before I could answer, Pulisic cut in, his tone smooth as poison. "Clara, don't bother your grandmother. She needs her rest. She's had a long week." Vanessa, my daughter, didn't even pause her scrolling. She laughed, a light, musical sound that struck me like a slap. "Dad's right, sweetie. Just let Grandma relax. She probably wouldn't follow the arguments anyway. They decided for me. They diagnosed my energy, my comprehension, my worth, without ever meeting my eyes." I said nothing. I simply looked down at my untouched plate, at the delicate pattern beneath poached eggs that had gone cold. They had erased me from my own story. And the unbearable truth was that I had let them. I had mistaken my quietness for grace. I understood now it had only been permission for them to forget I was ever someone who mattered. For days later, there was a deliberate knock at my cottage door. It was Pulisic. This was unusual. He avoided my home like it carried bad luck, probably because it lacked the marble and gold he worshipped. He stood on my doorstep holding an absurdly expensive bottle of Bordeaux, which he pressed into my hands with practiced charm. "For you, Jamie. Best vintage I could find." He knew I didn't drink. My doctor had been crystal clear after the angina diagnosis. This wasn't generosity. It was a theater. Pulisic Wea was always performing. He sold luxury developments. He sold the image of success. I'd spent 30 years as an investigative journalist exposing men exactly like him, men who don't walk into rooms, they appraise them for resale value. He wasted no time on pleasantries. After one hollow comment about the weather, he shifted his weight and dropped his mask. Jamie, I need to talk to you about something important. A once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. His smile was rehearsed. The Green Bay project, it's this close to breaking ground. But there's a small regulatory issue. Nothing serious, just liquidity requirements to satisfy the commission. I need a bridge loan. Short term. Maybe 6 months. He leaned forward. His cologne was expensive and suffocating. I know you own this cottage outright. It's just sitting here. All you'd need to do is leverage it. $500,000. He leaned forward. His cologne was expensive and suffocating. I know you own this cottage outright. It's just sitting here. All you'd need to do is leverage it. $500,000. The words hung in the air between us like smoke. Pulisic's smile remained fixed, confident. He'd practiced this pitch, refined it. I could see him calculating behind those dark eyes, how much pressure to apply, when to pull back, when to close. I set the wine bottle down on the small table by the door. Slowly. Deliberately. No. The single word seemed to surprise him more than a slap would have. His smile flickered, recalibrated. Jamie, I don't think you understand. This isn't some sketchy deal. This is vetted, backed by major investors. WIA Global has a reputation. I understand perfectly, I said, my voice quiet but firm. And my answer is no. My retirement isn't your safety net, Pulisic. Something shifted in his expression. The warmth drained from his face like water circling a drain. What remained was colder, sharper. Your retirement. He said the words like they tasted bitter. You mean the money Benjamin left you? The money he earned while you were writing little articles about city council meetings. There it was. The blade beneath the silk. I worked for 30 years, I said evenly. Benjamin respected what I did. Benjamin's gone. Pulisic took a step closer, and I could see the muscles in his jaw working. You're living here because Vanessa allows it. Because we allow it. You're on our property, Jamie. In our guest house. We've never asked you for rent, never asked you to contribute to utilities, landscaping, security. And now, when we need one favor, one small bridge loan that would be repaid with interest, you can't see past your own selfishness? I felt my heart rate pick up, not from fear but from the audacity. The sheer, breathtaking audacity. This cottage, I said carefully, each word measured, is mine. I own it. The deed is in my name. A cottage on our land. No. I walked past him to the small desk near the window, opened the top drawer, and pulled out a folder. My hands were steady. This land, all 6 acres of it, including the ground your mansion sits on, is mine. I bought it outright 3 years ago when Benjamin died. The deed is recorded with the county. I gave Vanessa and you the right to build here. I thought it would keep us close. I held out the folder, but he didn't take it. He stared at me like I'd just spoken in a language he didn't understand. That's not possible, he said, but his voice had lost its certainty. The property records are public, Pulisic. You can verify it yourself. The Bay Harbor mansion sits on land titled to Jamie Mirren. I never charged you rent. I never asked for a penny. I wanted my daughter to have a beautiful home. I wanted my granddaughter to have space to grow up. I thought that's what family meant. The color rose in his neck, creeping up toward his face like a tide. His hands curled into fists at his sides. You manipulative, he stopped himself, but barely. You let us build there. You let us invest millions into that house, knowing the whole time you could pull the ground out from under us? I gave you security, I said quietly. I gave you stability. I never threatened you, never leveraged it. Not once. But I won't be guilted into funding your failing projects. Failing? His voice cracked like a whip. You don't know anything about my business. I know you wouldn't be here, in my cottage, asking for $500,000 if everything was as solid as you claim. For a moment, I thought he might actually lunge at me. His whole body was coiled, trembling with rage. Then he seemed to regain control, but it was a brittle, dangerous kind of control. You're making a mistake, he said, his voice low and cold. A serious mistake. Vanessa is going to hear about this. About how you've been sitting on the secret, how you've been holding it over our heads. I haven't held anything over anyone, I said. But tell her. Tell her everything. He grabbed the wine bottle off the table, his wine, the gift that was never really a gift, and moved toward the door. He paused at the threshold, his back to me. You know what your problem is, Jamie? You think you still matter. You think you're still that journalist who broke stories and changed things. But you're just an old woman living in the past. An old woman who don't know their place. He turned his head slightly, just enough for me to see his profile. They get forgotten. Or worse. The door slammed hard enough to rattle the frame. I stood there in the sudden silence, my cottage feeling smaller, the air feeling thinner. My hands were still steady, but inside, something had shifted. A line had been crossed. A war had been declared, though only one of us seemed to know it yet. I walked back to the desk and carefully returned the property deed to its folder. Then I sat down in Benjamin's old chair and stared at his photograph on the shelf, him smiling at some gallery opening, proud and alive. He just threatened me, I whispered to the empty room. Our son-in-law just threatened me. The photograph didn't answer. But somewhere deep inside, something that had been dormant for 15 years began to stir. The phoenix wasn't just a name. It was a warning. And Pulisic had just lit the match. For 3 days after his visit, I waited for Vanessa to call. To ask my side of the story. To verify what Pulisic had surely told her, that I owned the land, that I'd refused his loan, that I'd somehow wronged them. She never called. The silence was its own kind of answer. On the fourth night, I woke at 2:47 a.m. to a pressure in my chest that felt like a fist closing around my heart. At first, I thought it was indigestion. I'd barely eaten dinner, just crackers and tea. But as I sat up in bed, the pressure tightened, radiating down my left arm. Angina. I recognized it from the episode 2 years ago, the one that had led to medication and stern warnings from Dr. Patel about stress management. I fumbled for my phone on the nightstand, my fingers clumsy. The pain wasn't unbearable yet, but it was building, a crescendo that promised to get worse. I needed help. I needed someone. I called Vanessa. The phone rang 4 times before she answered, her voice thick with sleep and irritation. Mom? Do you know what time it is? Vanessa, I had to pause, breathe through the tightness. I'm having chest pain. I think it's my heart. Can you? Mom, please. She sighed, a long-suffering sound that cut deeper than the pain in my chest. It's almost 3 in the morning. Just call 911. That's what they're for. I thought maybe you could. I have a client meeting at 8. I need sleep. Call 911, okay? They'll take care of you. There was a pause. I waited for something more. And I love you. Let me know you're okay. Even a text me later. Instead, I heard muffled voices in the background, Pulisic saying something I couldn't make out, and then Vanessa came back on the line. Mom, I have to go. Call for help if you need it. The line went dead. I sat there in the darkness, my phone still pressed to my ear, listening to silence. The pain in my chest intensified, but I realized with sudden, brutal clarity that it wasn't just my heart. It was the organ next to it, the one that had spent 72 years learning to love, learning to hope, learning to forgive. That organ was breaking. I opened the Uber app with shaking hands. The driver, a tired-looking man named Marcus, arrived in 11 minutes. He took one look at me clutching my chest and asked if he should call an ambulance. I told him no, just drive. St. Catherine's was only 15 minutes away. He didn't speak during the ride, but he kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror, his eyes worried. I stared out the window at the empty streets, at the dark houses where families slept safely together, and I felt more alone than I had ever felt in my life. Benjamin had been dead for 3 years, but I hadn't felt like a widow until that moment. Alone in a stranger's car at 3 in the morning, heading to an emergency room where no one would be waiting. The ER was bright and cold and efficient. They ran tests, EKG, blood work, chest x-ray. A young doctor with kind eyes told me it was stress-induced angina, not a heart attack, but that I needed to be careful. Stress was a silent killer, she said. I needed to eliminate sources of anxiety in my life. I almost laughed. Almost. They kept me until 6 a.m. for observation, then discharged me with a prescription and instructions to follow up with my cardiologist. I called another Uber. The sun was just beginning to rise as we pulled back into Bay Harbor Estates. The mansions looked different in the dawn light, less impressive, more exposed. Marcus, the second driver, helped me out of the car and asked 3 times if I was sure I'd be okay going in alone. I lied and said yes. But as I walked up the long driveway toward my cottage, something made me look up at the main house. Vanessa's white Mercedes wasn't in the circular drive. The house looked dark, empty. Where was she? Some instinct I didn't understand made me check my phone. I opened the location-sharing app that Vanessa had insisted we all install for safety. Her pin glowed on the map. She wasn't at home. She wasn't at a hospital looking for me. She was at Azure Wellness Spa on Sunset Boulevard. I stood there in my driveway, still wearing yesterday's clothes that smelled like antiseptic in fear, and I understood. She hadn't forgotten to check on me. She hadn't fallen back asleep worried. She had gone to her early morning yoga class and spa appointment, the one she went to every Thursday. The one she told me about weeks ago, the one that cost $300 and included a seaweed wrap and champagne. My daughter had received a call from her mother having a heart episode at 3 in the morning, and by 7 a.m., she was at a spa. I walked slowly to my cottage door and let myself in. Everything looked the same: Benjamin's photograph, my desk, the folder with the property deed still in the drawer. But I felt different. Transformed. They hadn't just forgotten me. They'd written me out of the story entirely. I was no longer the protagonist of my own life. I wasn't even a supporting character. I was set dressing. Background noise. An inconvenience to be managed or ignored. I sat down at my desk and pulled out a drawer I hadn't opened in 15 years. Inside was a flash drive labeled Archive, Phoenix Files, and an old press credential with my photo from 2010. I looked younger in the picture, harder. The woman who had brought down senators and CEOs. The woman who didn't let anyone make her invisible. I plugged the flash drive into my laptop. Somewhere in this house, my heart was still beating irregularly. But something else was awakening, something that didn't depend on blood and arteries. Something that had been sleeping too long. If they wanted to erase me, I would remind them that ghosts can be more dangerous than the living. I opened my contact list and scrolled to a name I hadn't called in a decade, Raylin. It was time to stop being a victim. It was time to become the phoenix again. I stared at Ree's name on my phone for a long moment, my finger hovering over the call button. It had been 10 years since we'd last spoken, a brief, awkward conversation at Benjamin's funeral where she'd held my hand and told me if I ever needed anything at all, to call. I never had. Pride, maybe. Or the belief that I'd left that life behind. Before I could make the call, there was a knock at my door. Sharp. Official. 3 measured raps that didn't sound like a neighbor or a friend. I checked the time, 9:17 a.m. I'd been awake for over 6 hours, running on nothing but adrenaline and the metallic taste of betrayal. Through the peephole, I saw a man in a blue uniform holding a tablet and a large white envelope. The logo on his shirt read Legal Express Delivery. My stomach dropped before my mind caught up. I opened the door. The courier was young, professional, disinterested. Jamie Mirren? Yes. Sign here, please. He held out the tablet. I signed with a stylus, my signature shaky. He handed me the envelope, thick, heavy, the kind that carries weight beyond its physical mass, and walked away without another word. I closed the door and stood there holding it, feeling the heft of it in my hands. The return address was a law firm I didn't recognize, Hastings and Brewer, LLP. Los Angeles, California. I knew what this was before I opened it. Some part of me had known since Pulisic slammed my door 4 days ago. I sat down at the kitchen table and broke the seal. The first page was a header in bold, formal type. Petition for appointment of conservator of the person and estate. Beneath it, in the matter of Jamie Elizabeth Mirren, proposed conservatee. Petitioners, Vanessa Mirren-Wea and Pulisic Wea. I read it twice. Then a third time. The words didn't change. My daughter, my only child, was petitioning the court to have me declared legally incompetent. The document was thorough, I'd give them that. 23 pages of legal language arguing that I was no longer capable of managing my own affairs, that I posed a danger to myself, that I required immediate intervention for her own protection and welfare. They cited incidents, my confusion at family gatherings, my inability to maintain basic self-care, my increasingly erratic behavior and paranoid accusations. None of it was true, but it was written with such clinical certainty that if I didn't know myself, I might have believed it. I flipped through the pages, my journalist's brain automatically cataloging, cross-referencing, looking for the weak points in the narrative. And then I found it. Exhibit C, Psychological Evaluation. The letterhead read, Dr. Ethan Rayner, Psy.D, Clinical Neuropsychology. The evaluation was dated 1 week ago, 4 days before Pulisic came to my cottage asking for money. The timing wasn't a coincidence. I read Dr. Rayner's assessment with the same cold precision I once used to dissect financial statements and shell companies. Patient exhibits significant cognitive decline consistent with early-stage dementia. Notable symptoms include memory impairment, difficulty with executive functioning, paranoid ideation, and diminished capacity for sound judgment. Patient has expressed unfounded beliefs that family members are plotting against her and has demonstrated inability to manage complex financial matters. In my professional opinion, Ms. Mirren requires a conservatorship to ensure her safety and protect her estate from exploitation, including self-exploitation through poor decision-making. I set the paper down carefully, as if it might detonate. They had built a trap. A careful, premeditated trap. The loan request wasn't desperation, it was bait. They wanted me to refuse. They needed me to refuse. It gave them evidence of my paranoia and irrational behavior. But something was wrong with the evaluation itself. I read it again, this time not as a frightened woman but as an investigative journalist who'd spent 30 years spotting forgeries and fabrications. The language was too polished, too certain. Real psychological evaluations hedged, qualified, presented ranges and possibilities. This read like a prosecutor's closing argument. And the symptoms described, memory impairment, confusion, bore no resemblance to my actual life. I managed my finances meticulously. I read 3 newspapers a day. I could recall conversations verbatim from weeks ago. More than that, I'd never met Dr. Ethan Rayner. Never been evaluated. Never even heard his name. This wasn't just an exaggeration. It was a fabrication. I stood up, walked to my desk, and pulled open the bottom drawer, the one I'd opened for the first time in 15 years just 2 hours ago. The encrypted flash drive sat there next to my old press credential, but there was something else I'd forgotten about. A smaller drawer within the drawer. Hidden. Built by Benjamin years ago when I'd started receiving threats from people I'd exposed. I pressed the false bottom and it clicked open. Inside was everything from my old life, backup drives, source documents, a burner phone I'd kept active out of paranoia I'd once thought was excessive. And my press credential, not the one from 2010, but the original from 1998, when I was young and hungry and believed journalism could change the world. The woman in that photo looked like me, but fiercer. Uncompromising. Her eyes held something I'd lost somewhere along the way. I picked up the credential and traced my thumb over the name, Jamie Mirren, Senior Investigative Correspondent. Beneath it, a handwritten note I'd forgotten I'd added years later, in permanent marker after my biggest exposé, The Phoenix Rises. I set down the papers, the petition, the fake evaluation, all of it, and spread them across my desk like evidence at a crime scene. Because that's what this was. Not a family dispute. A crime. I opened my laptop and began a new file, William Mirren Case Evidence Log. My hands moved across the keyboard with muscle memory I thought I'd lost. Clean. Precise. No emotion, just facts. This was what I did. This was who I was before I became someone's mother, someone's widow, someone's burden. I was the woman who found the truth when people tried to bury it. I pulled up a search window and typed, Dr. Ethan Rayner, California, psychologist. The results loaded. And I smiled for the first time in days. Not a warm smile. A predator's smile. Because Dr. Ethan Rayner existed, all right. But he wasn't a psychologist. I picked up my phone and finally called Raylyn. She answered on the second ring. Jamie? Her voice was cautious, surprised. Is everything okay? No, I said quietly. But it's about to be. I need your help, Ray. I need a lawyer, and I need someone I can trust. Tell me. My daughter is trying to have me declared incompetent. And I'm going to prove she's a criminal instead. There was a pause. Then Ree's voice came back, harder now, professional, send me everything you have. I looked at the papers spread before me, at the flash drive, at my old credential. If they want a ghost, I whispered after hanging up, speaking to the empty room and to the woman I used to be, I'll give them one. I'll give them the Phoenix. And this time, someone was going to burn. Raylyn arrived at my cottage 90 minutes later. I watched through the window as she parked her Tesla at the far end of the driveway, deliberately out of sight from the main house, and walked toward my door carrying a leather messenger bag and 2 cups of coffee. She looked exactly as I remembered, but more polished. The sharp-eyed law student I'd mentored 15 years ago had become a sharp-eyed attorney with a corner office. Her dark hair was shorter now, cut in a precise bob. Her suit was charcoal gray and expensive. But her eyes, those hadn't changed. They still held that restless intelligence that had reminded me of myself at 30. I opened the door before she could knock. "Jamie." She handed me one of the coffees, black, no sugar, the way I'd always taken it. She remembered. "You look like hell. I spent last night in the ER. Stress-induced angina." Her expression shifted immediately. "Jesus. Are you okay? Should you even be?" "I'm fine." I stepped aside to let her in. "Or I will be once we destroy my daughter's legal case and possibly her marriage." Ray stopped in the doorway and looked at me, really looked at me. Then a slow smile crossed her face. "There she is." I was wondering if the phoenix was still in there. "Barely," I admitted. "But she's awake now." We sat at my kitchen table, the conservatorship petition spread between us like a dissection. Ray pulled reading glasses from her bag and began reviewing the documents with the systematic precision of a surgeon. "This is sophisticated work," she said after several minutes. "Hastings and Brewer aren't ambulance chasers. They're a top-tier estate litigation firm. Your daughter paid serious money for this. Or her husband did. Tell me about him." I gave her the summary: Pulisic Wea, CEO of Wea Global, real estate developer, all charm and expensive suits. The loan request. The threat. The timing. Ree's pen moved across her legal pad in quick, efficient strokes. The loan request 4 days after this evaluation was dated. That's not coincidence. They were testing you. If you'd said yes, they might have taken the money and shelved this petition. But you said no, so they moved forward. This was always the backup plan. Or the primary plan, I said. The loan might have been theater. A way to document my paranoia when I refused. Ray looked up at me, and I saw something like pride flicker across her face. "You haven't lost it. That's the phoenix I remember, the one who taught me to follow the money and trust nothing." "You didn't have to come," I said quietly. "After all these years. After I disappeared." "Are you kidding?" Ray set down her pen. "Jamie, you're the reason I'm a lawyer. You're the reason I'm not working some soul-crushing corporate job. When I was your intern, struggling with my LSATs, convinced I wasn't smart enough, you told me intelligence isn't about being the smartest person in the room. It's about asking better questions than everyone else." I remembered that conversation. A younger Ray, exhausted and doubting, sitting in my old office at the paper at 2 in the morning. "You went on to expose Senator Harmon's bribery scheme," Ray continued. "And you brought me with you. You taught me how to investigate, how to think like a predator when you're hunting corruption. You gave me a purpose." She leaned forward. "So no, I didn't have to come. I wanted to. And we're going to dismantle this thing piece by piece." I felt something loosen in my chest. Not the angina. Something else. Hope, maybe. "We need to work quietly," I said. "They can't know we're building a countercase until we're ready." Agreed. First priority, this evaluation. Ray tapped the paper. "Dr. Ethan Rayner. Something about this doesn't smell right. The language is too confident, too absolute. Real clinicians cover their asses with qualifiers." I thought the same thing. "Let me make some calls." Ray stepped outside, phone pressed to her ear. Through the window, I watched her pace, her expression shifting from professional to shocked to grimly satisfied. She was inside again within 20 minutes. Jamie. Her voice was tight. Dr. Ethan Rayner isn't a psychiatrist. He's not a psychologist. He's not even a licensed medical professional anymore. What is he? He was a cosmetic surgeon. Lost his license 3 years ago for malpractice, botched procedures, falsified credentials, operating while impaired. He's been fighting to get his medical license reinstated ever since, but the California Medical Board denied him. I felt the pieces beginning to align. So how does a disgraced cosmetic surgeon end up writing psychological evaluations? He doesn't. Not legally. Ray pulled out her laptop and turned it toward me. On the screen was a scanned document, a bail bond from 5 years ago. But here's the interesting part. In 2020, Rayner was arrested for fraud. Bail was set at $200,000. He couldn't pay it. But someone did. She clicked to the next page. A company name, WIA Global Properties, LLC. My blood went cold. Pulisic bailed him out, I whispered. 5 years ago, Ray confirmed. Long before you moved here. Long before any of this started. He's had Rayner in his pocket all this time, keeping him on standby. I stood up and walked to the window, looking toward the mansion. Vanessa's car was back now, parked in the circular drive. She was home. Probably having brunch on the terrace, completely unaware that her husband's conspiracy was unraveling 100 yards away. Or maybe she knew exactly what Pulisic had done. Maybe she'd known all along. This wasn't opportunistic, I said, my voice steady and cold. This was premeditated. Pulisic has been planning something like this for years. He just needed the right victim. And then you moved onto his property. Onto my property, I corrected. With money. With assets he couldn't touch. Until now. Ray stood beside me. What do you want to do? I thought about the courtroom. About my daughter's scornful laugh. About the judge whispering Phoenix as everything shifted. That moment hadn't happened yet, but I could see it clearly now. I could build toward it. We investigate, I said. Everything. WIA Global's finances, their projects, their partnerships. We find out where Pulisic is vulnerable. We document every lie in this petition. And we prepare a counterattack so complete, so devastating, that when we walk into that courtroom, we won't just win. We'll destroy them. That's going to take time. I turned to face her. My voice came out quiet but certain, carrying a weight I hadn't felt in 15 years. They've had 5 years to plan this. I'll need only 5 days. Ray studied my face for a long moment. Then she smiled, the kind of smile that wasn't about happiness. It was about recognition. About remembering who someone used to be and watching them become that person again. 5 days, she repeated. The Phoenix really is back. She never left, I said. She was just sleeping. I looked back toward the mansion, toward my daughter's home built on my land, and felt something settle into place. Not anger. Something colder. More surgical. Pulisic WIA thought he was hunting a frail old woman. He had no idea he'd just awakened a predator. Over the next 3 days, my cottage became a war room. Ray brought her paralegal, a quiet woman named Sarah who could navigate corporate databases like a bloodhound following a scent. I pulled out my old files, my contact lists, my research methods that had once exposed billion-dollar frauds. We worked in shifts. When Ray needed sleep, I kept going. When exhaustion threatened to pull me under, Sarah made coffee and Ray took over. The phoenix didn't sleep much, I remembered. She hunted. The first crack appeared on day 2. We Global Properties had a public face, glossy brochures, a sleek website, press releases about luxury developments and sustainable resort communities. But corporations are like icebergs. The real mass is hidden below the surface. I started where I always started, following the money. Corporate filings. Loan documents. Tax liens. Building permits. The tedious, unglamorous work that most people found mind-numbing but I found meditative. Numbers didn't lie. They couldn't perform charm or wear expensive cologne. They simply existed, waiting to be read correctly. By midnight on the second day, I found it. Ray. My voice was hoarse. Look at this. She came to stand behind my chair, reading over my shoulder. On my screen was a foreclosure notice filed 6 months ago against WIA Global's primary holdings company. The Green Bay Resort project, the 9-figure deal Pulisic had bragged about at that Sunday brunch, wasn't thriving. It was drowning. That's a $47 million default, Ray said quietly. That's just the first lien. I pulled up another document. There's a mezzanine loan for $23 million. And a personal guarantee from Pulisic himself for $12 million. The project is 90 days from foreclosure sale. So he's desperate. He's been desperate for months. Maybe longer. I traced the timeline backward, pulling up older filings. He started leveraging everything 2 years ago. He took out loans against properties he'd already mortgaged. Classic House of Cards financing. One piece falls, everything collapses. Sarah leaned in, her fingers flying across her laptop. I'm looking at his other projects. Culver City mixed-use development, behind schedule, over budget. The Malibu Estate subdivision, stalled in permitting for 18 months. He's got nothing liquid. Everything's leveraged or frozen. The picture was becoming clear. Pulisic WIA wasn't a successful developer. He was a desperate man running a failing empire held together with duct tape and lies. My $500,000 wouldn't have saved him, it would have barely bought him another month. But my entire estate? My property? That was real value. That was salvation. He needs my conservatorship to survive, I said. Once he controls my assets, he can liquidate everything, pay off his debts, and start over. Or just disappear with the money, Ray added darkly. I sat back in my chair, feeling the weight of it. This wasn't family drama. This was financial predation dressed up in legal documents and fake psychiatric evaluations. Keep digging, I said. I want to know every debt, every creditor, every vulnerability. It was Sarah who found the next piece, at 3 a.m. on day 3. Jamie. Her voice was strange. Careful. You need to see this. She turned her laptop toward me. On the screen was a bank transaction record, a wire transfer from the Benjamin Mirren Literacy Fund. The charity Benjamin had founded 20 years ago to provide books to underserved schools. The charity that Vanessa had taken over as executive director after his death. The transfer was for $180,000, dated 5 weeks ago. Destination account, Hastings and Brewer, LLP. Attorney retainer. I stared at the screen until the numbers blurred. There's more, Sarah said quietly. She pulled up another transfer. Then another. Over the past 6 months, nearly $400,000 had been moved out of the literacy fund. Some went to the law firm. Some went to accounts I didn't recognize. Some went directly to We Global. She's embezzling from her father's charity, Ray said, her voice hard. She's stealing from children to pay for lawyers to steal from you. I stood up and walked to the window. Dawn was breaking over the Bay Harbor estate. The mansion looked peaceful, beautiful. A monument to success and family. It was built on rot. They weaponized memory, I whispered. Benjamin's memory. His legacy. Everything he believed in. They turned it into ammunition to use against me. I felt Ree's hand on my shoulder. Jamie. I'm fine. I wasn't. My hands were shaking. But I'd learned a long time ago that you could function through heartbreak if you had a purpose. This is evidence. We document everything. Every transaction, every date, every signature. Her signature is on all of these transfers, Sarah confirmed. Vanessa authorized them personally. So she knew. My daughter knew exactly what she was doing. This wasn't just Pulisic manipulating her. She was an active participant. A co-conspirator. I thought about the night I'd called her from my cottage, chest tight with angina, and she told me to call 911 because she had an early meeting. I thought about her at the spa the next morning while I sat alone in an ER. I thought about her giggling at that dinner table while her husband dismissed me as too old to matter. She hadn't been complicit. She'd been calculating. We need leverage, I said, my voice steady now. Cold. Exposing them isn't enough. We need to control them. Ray understood immediately. You want to buy his debt. If he's 90 days from foreclosure, his lenders are motivated to sell. They'd rather get something now than fight through bankruptcy later. We find out who holds his paper, and we make an offer. That's going to cost. I have the money. I'd been careful with Benjamin's life insurance, with our investments, with the sale of our brownstone. I had resources Pulisic didn't know about. I can liquidate enough to purchase the primary note. Maybe the mezzanine loan too. You'll own him, Ray said slowly. Completely. I'll own his company, his assets, his future. I turned back from the window. He thinks I'm a liability he needs to eliminate. By the time we walk into that courtroom, I'll be his lender. I'll control whether he survives or collapses. Sarah was already pulling up contact information for We Global's creditors. Ray was making notes, mapping out the strategy. They worked with the smooth efficiency of a team that had done this before, because we had, in another life, when we were journalists hunting corruption instead of lawyers defending against it. But the skills were the same. The instincts identical. I looked at Benjamin's photograph on my desk. My husband, who had believed that literacy could change the world. Who had poured his heart into helping children learn to read. Who had trusted our daughter to carry on that work after he was gone. I'm sorry, I whispered to the photograph. I should have been watching. I should have protected what you built. But I was watching now. And I was done protecting people who had turned his memory into a weapon. Ray stood beside me, her expression fierce. We're going to destroy them, aren't we? I picked up my phone and began composing an email to my investment advisor. I needed to liquidate $5 million in bonds by end of business tomorrow. No questions, no delays. He thinks I'm a liability, I said quietly, hitting send. In 5 days, I'll be his lender. And then we'll see who's incompetent to manage their own affairs. The phoenix wasn't just rising. She was about to burn everything to the ground. On day 4, the pieces fell into place with the satisfying click of a lock opening. Pacific Coast Capital, the primary lender on Green Bay Resort, was underwater and desperate. They'd been trying to offload Pulisic's defaulted loan for months with no takers. When my investment advisor, acting through a shell company I'd established years ago for source protection, offered them 60 cents on the dollar for immediate close, they didn't even negotiate. They just asked where to send the paperwork. By noon, I owned $47 million of Pulisic WIA's debt. By 5 p.m., I owned the mezzanine loan too. My daughter's husband was now my debtor. And he had no idea. The hearing is tomorrow at 10 a.m., Ray said, reviewing her notes one final time. We were sitting in my cottage on the evening of day 5, surrounded by evidence binders, legal briefs, and highlighted documents. Judge Catherine Morrison presiding. She's fair but no nonsense. Hates wasting time on frivolous cases. This case won't last long, I said. No. Ray smiled grimly. It won't. Here's how we play it, they'll present their petition first. Hastings will argue you're incompetent, cite the Rayner evaluation, probably put on a little show about your concerning behavior. Then they'll call Dr. Rayner to testify. And that's when we strike. That's when we eviscerate him. I'll cross-examine on his credentials, his suspension, his connection to Pulisic. Then we introduce the bail bond documents, the payment history, the whole conspiracy. After that, she tapped a thick binder. We present evidence of the embezzlement. Every transaction from the literacy fund, every fraudulent transfer. We show the judge this isn't a conservatorship case. It's a criminal enterprise. And the debt purchase? We save that for last. After we've destroyed their credibility, after we've exposed the fraud, then you stand up and inform the court that you are now Pulisic WIA's primary creditor. That you own him. Ree's eyes glinted. It's not just winning, Jamie. It's total annihilation. I should have felt satisfaction. Triumph, even. But all I felt was a cold, empty clarity. What about Vanessa? I asked quietly. Ree's expression softened. That's your call. We have enough evidence to recommend criminal charges. Embezzlement from a charitable organization is a felony. But you're her mother. If you want to. I want justice, I said. Whatever that means. The truth was, I didn't know what I wanted when it came to my daughter. Punishment? Redemption? Some impossible combination of both? My phone buzzed. A text from Vanessa, the first communication I'd received from her since the night of my ER visit. Mom, please don't fight this tomorrow. The lawyers say if you cooperate, it will be easier for everyone. We're doing this because we love you. I stared at the message for a long moment, then set the phone down without responding. You should get some rest, Ray said. Tomorrow's going to be intense. After she left, I sat alone in the growing darkness. I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat there, thinking about Vanessa. I remembered her at 7 years old, coming home from school crying because a boy had told her she was bad at math. Benjamin had sat with her for hours, teaching her fractions with cut-up apples until she understood. When she finally got it, her face had lit up with pure joy. I remembered her at 16, staying up all night to finish an essay about injustice she'd witnessed at school. She'd been so passionate, so convinced that speaking truth mattered. She'd asked me to read it, to help her make it stronger. I want to be like you, Mom, she'd said. I want to expose things that are wrong. I remembered her at 23, reading the eulogy at Benjamin's funeral. She'd barely made it through, her voice breaking on every other word. Afterward, she'd collapsed into my arms. I don't know how to be in a world without him, she'd sobbed. How do I do this? When had that girl become the woman who could steal from her father's charity? Who could sign papers to have her own mother declared incompetent? Who could go to a spa while her mother sat alone in an emergency room? Maybe she hadn't changed. Maybe I'd simply been blind. That was the thing about motherhood, it distorted your vision. You kept seeing the child they were, not the adult they'd become. You made excuses. You forgave the unforgivable because you remembered who they used to be, or who you hoped they still could be. I had been blind long before the betrayal. I'd been blind the first time Vanessa dismissed me at a family dinner. Blind when she'd stopped asking about my work, my life, my thoughts. Blind when she'd started measuring her worth by Pulisic's wealth instead of her own integrity. Motherhood had made me weak. It had made me willing to accept invisibility as long as it meant staying close to my child. But I wasn't a mother anymore. Not tomorrow. Tomorrow, I was the phoenix. I stood and walked to the bathroom, flipping on the harsh fluorescent light. My reflection stared back at me, a 72-year-old woman with silver hair and tired eyes. I looked old. Diminished. Exactly the kind of person a judge might believe needed protecting. But looks were deceiving. I leaned closer to the mirror, studying my own face. Somewhere beneath the age and exhaustion was the woman who had brought down senators. The woman who had exposed corporate fraud so massive it had changed federal law. The woman who had earned the name Phoenix because she burned through lies until only truth remained. She was still there. I could see her now. The phoenix doesn't forgive, I whispered to my reflection. My voice was steady. Cold. Final. Tomorrow morning, I would walk into that courtroom. My daughter would laugh at me, thinking I was defeated. My son-in-law would look away, thinking I was irrelevant. The judge would look up from her notes, and in that moment, everything would change. Because I wasn't going to that courtroom to defend myself. I was going there to destroy them. I thought about Vanessa one last time, about the little girl with apple slices learning fractions, about the teenager who wanted to fight injustice, about the young woman sobbing at her father's funeral. Then I thought about the woman who had stolen from her father's charity to pay lawyers to cage her own mother. Those weren't the same person. Maybe they never had been. Maybe I'd just been telling myself a story about who my daughter was because the truth was too painful to accept. I turned off the bathroom light and returned to my desk. The evidence binders were stacked neatly, ready for transport. My suit for tomorrow, charcoal gray, professional, commanding, hung on the door. Everything was prepared. I opened my laptop one last time and pulled up the photograph I'd scanned weeks ago, Benjamin, Vanessa, and me at her college graduation. We were all smiling. We looked like a family. I studied Vanessa's face in that photo, trying to find the moment when innocence had curdled into greed. But I couldn't. Maybe there was no single moment. Maybe it had been gradual, imperceptible. A series of small compromises that accumulated into something monstrous. Or maybe she'd always been capable of this, and I'd simply refused to see it. I closed the laptop. Tomorrow, the truth would speak for itself. And when it did, there would be no more blindness, no more excuses, no more forgiveness. The phoenix had risen. And she was ready to burn. The moment I stepped into that courtroom, my daughter laughed, a sharp, scornful sound that echoed off marble walls. My son-in-law wouldn't even look at me. He turned his face away like I was something embarrassing he'd been caught with. But then the judge glanced up from her notes. Judge Catherine Morrison was in her mid-50s, with steel-gray hair and the kind of sharp eyes that suggested she'd heard every lie the legal system had to offer. She looked at me, really looked, and her pen stopped mid-stroke. Her face went pale. "Is that really her?" she whispered to her clerk, though the microphone caught it anyway. The clerk checked the docket, confused. Jamie Mirren, Your Honor. The proposed conservatee. The judge's gaze locked on mine, and I saw recognition flash across her features. She'd been a junior prosecutor 15 years ago when I'd broken the Meridian financial scandal. She'd used my reporting to build her case. She knew exactly who I was. Or who I had been. The Phoenix, she breathed. The courtroom went silent. Vanessa's laugh died in her throat. Pulisic finally looked at me, his expression shifting from disdain to confusion. Even their attorney, a silver-haired man named Marcus Hastings, seemed caught off guard. Your Honor? Hastings said uncertainly. Judge Morrison collected herself, though her hand trembled slightly as she lifted her gavel. We'll proceed. Mr. Hastings, you may present your opening statement. I took my seat beside Ray at the respondent's table. My hands were folded calmly in my lap. I looked exactly like what they wanted me to be, a frail old woman, quietly confused, perhaps a little lost. Hastings stood, buttoning his suit jacket with practiced precision. Your Honor, this is a straightforward matter of elder protection. Ms. Mirren, though once a capable professional, has experienced significant cognitive decline. She exhibits paranoid ideation, memory impairment, and an inability to manage complex financial decisions. Her family has observed these changes with growing concern. They bring this petition not out of malice, but out of love and necessity. He painted a picture of a sad, deteriorating woman. A mother who no longer recognized reality. A widow lost in grief and confusion. It was a compelling narrative, delivered with just the right mix of compassion and legal authority. If any of it had been true, I might have believed him myself. We have extensive documentation, Hastings continued, including a comprehensive psychological evaluation by Dr. Ethan Rayner, a respected clinical psychologist, who has concluded that Ms. Mirren requires immediate conservatorship for her own protection. Your Honor, Ray stood, her voice clear and sharp. The respondent contests every claim in this petition and requests the opportunity for cross-examination. So noted, Judge Morrison said. Mr. Hastings, call your first witness. The petitioners called Dr. Ethan Rayner. A thin man in an ill-fitting suit entered the courtroom. He had the nervous energy of someone who knew he was in over his head but was committed to the performance. He was sworn in and took the stand. Hastings walked him through the evaluation, the tests allegedly administered, the symptoms allegedly observed, the diagnosis allegedly reached. Dr. Rayner spoke with rehearsed confidence about cognitive decline, impaired judgment, the necessity of intervention. It was a good performance. Almost believable. Then Ray stood for cross-examination. Dr. Rayner, she said pleasantly, you testified that you're a clinical psychologist. Is that correct? Yes. And you're licensed to practice in California? A pause. I'm currently in the process of license renewal. That's not what I asked. Do you currently hold an active license to practice psychology in the state of California? The licensing board is reviewing. Yes or no, Dr. Rayner? His jaw tightened. No. Not currently. In fact, you've never held a license to practice psychology, have you? The courtroom went still. I have extensive medical training. Answer the question. Have you ever been licensed as a psychologist in any state? No. Ray pulled a document from her folder and approached the bench. Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence the professional history of Ethan Rayner. Dr. Rayner is not a psychologist. He's a cosmetic surgeon who lost his medical license 3 years ago due to malpractice, falsified credentials, and operating while impaired. Vanessa gasped. Pulisic's face went white. Ray wasn't finished. She pulled up a second document on the courtroom's display screen. This is a bail bond from 2020. Dr. Rayner was arrested for fraud. He couldn't pay his $200,000 bail. But someone paid it for him. She clicked to the next page. WIA Global Properties, LLC. Mr. Pulisic WIA's company. The image filled the screen, the bail bond, Pulisic's signature, the payment confirmation. Dr. Rayner, Ree's voice was ice. How much did Mr. WIA pay you to write a fraudulent psychological evaluation of his mother-in-law? I didn't. We have your bank records. A payment of $50,000, deposited 2 days after this evaluation was dated. Would you like to revise your testimony? Dr. Rayner's face crumbled. He looked at Pulisic, desperate, but Pulisic was staring at the table, his jaw clenched. I want to invoke my right against self-incrimination, Rayner stammered. Judge Morrison's gavel came down hard. Dr. Rayner, you're dismissed from the stand, and I'm referring this matter to the district attorney for investigation of perjury and fraud. Bailiff, please escort him out. As Rayner was led away, Ray turned to the bench. Your Honor, there's more. The petitioners claim they're acting out of concern for Ms. Mirren's welfare. But the truth is far uglier. She pulled up a new set of documents on the screen. Bank statements. Wire transfers. All bearing Vanessa's signature. These are transactions from the Benjamin Mirren Literacy Fund, a charity established by Ms. Mirren's late husband to provide books to underprivileged children. Over the past 6 months, the petitioner Vanessa WIA has embezzled nearly $400,000 from this fund. Some of it went to pay Hastings and Brewer's legal fees. Some went directly to WIA Global to cover Mr. WIA's business debts. The courtroom erupted. Hastings shot to his feet, objecting. Vanessa's face was in her hands, her shoulders shaking. Pulisic stood up, his voice rising. This is outrageous. You can't just. Sit down. Judge Morrison's gavel cracked like thunder. Everyone sit down and be silent, or I will clear this courtroom. Order slowly returned, but the air was electric with shock. Ray continued, relentless. This conservatorship petition isn't about protecting an elderly woman. It's about stealing her assets to cover Mr. WIA's catastrophic business failures. WIA Global is bankrupt, Your Honor. The Green Bay Resort project has defaulted on $47 million in loans. Mr. WIA is 90 days from foreclosure. I stood. Slowly, calmly, every eye in the courtroom turning toward me. Your Honor, I said, my voice clear and steady, I'm not here to prove I'm mentally competent. The evidence speaks for itself. I'm here to foreclose. Judge Morrison leaned forward. Excuse me? 5 days ago, I purchased Mr. WIA's defaulted loans through a private investment vehicle. I now own the primary and mezzanine debt on WIA Global Properties. I own his company, his assets, and his future. I am his creditor. I looked directly at Pulisic. And I'm calling the debt due immediately. Pulisic's face went from white to crimson. That's impossible. You can't. I can, I said. And I have. Every asset of WIA Global is now subject to foreclosure. Including the Bay Harbor mansion, which, you may recall, sits on land that I already own. The judge looked at the documents Ray handed her, then back at me, something like awe crossing her features. Ms. Mirren, she said slowly, am I to understand that the people attempting to have you declared incompetent are themselves facing financial ruin and criminal charges? Yes, Your Honor. Judge Morrison set down the papers and looked at Hastings. Mr. Hastings, does your client wish to withdraw this petition, or shall I dismiss it with prejudice? Hastings looked broken. We withdraw, Your Honor. Dismissed with prejudice. I'm also ordering a full audit of the Benjamin Mirren Literacy Fund and referring this matter to the district attorney for prosecution. She looked at Vanessa and Pulisic. You should both retain criminal defense attorneys. Vanessa was sobbing openly now. Pulisic sat frozen, disbelief etched into every line of his face. I gathered my folder and stood. Ray beside me, victorious and fierce. As I walked past my daughter's table, I paused. Vanessa looked up at me, mascara streaking her face. Mom, she whispered. Please. I looked at her, the stranger who used to be my child, and felt nothing but a vast, cold emptiness. You wanted to erase me, I said quietly. You almost did. But the phoenix doesn't stay buried. I walked out of that courtroom into the bright California morning, leaving behind the ashes of my daughter's greed and my son-in-law's desperation. Truth had spoken. And for the first time in years, I could breathe. And for the first time in years, I could breathe. 6 months later, I stood on the deck of a small cottage in Cambria, watching fog roll in from the Pacific. The air tasted of salt and possibility. Behind me, through the open door, I could hear the familiar clack of my typewriter, an old Royal I'd bought at an estate sale the week I moved here. I was writing again. Not journalism, exactly. Something closer to memoir. The story of what happens when the people you love most try to erase you, and you have to choose between mercy and justice. I was still deciding which I'd chosen. The legal aftermath had been swift and brutal. Pulisic was convicted on 11 counts of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The prosecutor, a young woman who reminded me of Ray, had built an airtight case. 12 years in federal prison. No possibility of parole for at least 8. Global was liquidated. The assets were sold to satisfy creditors, primarily me. The Bay Harbor mansion went to a tech executive for $8 million. I kept none of it. Every dollar went to rebuilding the Benjamin Mirren Literacy Fund, restoring what Vanessa had stolen and then some. Vanessa herself had avoided prison, barely. Her attorney, not Hastings, who'd been quietly disbarred, had negotiated a plea deal. 3 years probation. 500 hours of community service. And restitution of every penny she'd taken. The judge had added one final touch, a twist of poetic justice I hadn't requested but deeply appreciated. Vanessa's community service would be served at the West Side Public Library, the very institution her father had helped build with his literacy foundation. She would spend her hours cataloging books, shelving donations, helping children learn to read. She would spend 3 years surrounded by her father's legacy, unable to escape what she tried to destroy. I thought about that often, Vanessa in the library's fluorescent lighting, surrounded by the smell of old paper and possibility, forced to remember who Benjamin had been. Who she used to be. Whether she'd learn anything from it, I couldn't say. I'd moved to Cambria 3 months ago, after the trials ended and the media attention finally died down. The cottage was small, affordable, and blessedly quiet. No family nearby. No expectations. Just the ocean, the fog, and the slowly accumulating pages of my manuscript. Ray visited once a month. She'd opened her own practice now, a boutique firm specializing in elder exploitation cases. You inspired me, she'd said over coffee during her last visit. Again. There are a lot of people like you out there, Jamie. People being erased by the people who should protect them. I want to fight for them. I'd smiled at that. The phoenix had lit more than one fire, it seemed. Clara, my granddaughter, had written me a letter. Just one, but it was enough. She was living with her maternal grandmother now, Pulisic's mother, a woman I'd never met but who had apparently been horrified by her son's actions. Clara's letter was brief, confused, but achingly sincere. Grandma Jamie, I don't understand everything that happened. But I'm sorry we stopped seeing you. I miss you. Can I visit sometime? I'd written back, anytime you want, sweetheart. The door is always open. She hadn't visited yet. But I kept hoping. It was late afternoon when I heard the car pull up the gravel driveway. I wasn't expecting anyone. Ray wasn't due for 2 more weeks, and the mail carrier had already come. I turned from the deck railing and saw her. Vanessa. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. Her designer clothes were gone, replaced by jeans and a simple sweater. Her hair, once meticulously highlighted, was growing out to its natural brown with threads of gray. She looked tired. Older than her 43 years. She stood by her car, a used Honda, not the white Mercedes, and stared at me like she wasn't sure she was allowed to approach. I didn't make it easy for her. I just waited. Finally, she walked up the deck steps. Mom. Vanessa. We stood there in silence, the fog swirling around us, the sound of waves filling the space between words. Can we talk? She asked. I gestured to the deck chairs. We sat, not looking at each other, both facing the ocean. I've been at the library for 3 months now, she said after a long pause. Every day, I see Dad's name on the plaque by the entrance. Benjamin Mirren, founder. Every day, I catalog books he would have wanted children to read. Books I stole money from. I said nothing. You could have stopped us, she said, her voice breaking. You knew what we were planning. You could have warned us, talked to us, given us a chance to back down. But you didn't. You let us destroy ourselves. I turned to look at her then. Really look at her. This woman who had once been my daughter. No, Vanessa, I said quietly. I couldn't have stopped you. You were already in motion. You'd already made your choices, to steal from your father's charity, to bribe a fake doctor, to try to cage your own mother. I didn't make you do any of that. I just refused to be your victim. But if you'd just given Pulisic the money, then what? He would have burned through it in a month and come back for more. And you would have learned that stealing works, that there are no consequences, that truth doesn't matter as long as you have money and lawyers. I shook my head. I wanted you to learn what truth costs when you sell it. Her face crumpled. It cost me everything. No. It cost you the things you gained by lying. There's a difference. I lost my husband. My home. My reputation. Clara barely speaks to me. You lost those things when you chose to steal and conspire, not when I chose to fight back. My voice was gentle but firm. I loved you, Vanessa. I still do, in the complicated way you love someone who's hurt you beyond measure. But I won't apologize for refusing to disappear just because it was convenient for you. She was crying now, silent tears tracking down her face. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know if you can, I said honestly. But you have 3 years of community service. 3 years of being surrounded by your father's legacy. Maybe you'll figure out who you want to be. Maybe you won't. That's not my burden to carry anymore. We sat in silence as the sun began to set, painting the fog in shades of gold and amber. Finally, Vanessa stood. I'm sorry, Mom. For all of it. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I'm sorry. I know you are, I said. I hope someday that's enough. She walked back to her car, paused with her hand on the door, looked back at me one more time. Then she drove away, her taillights disappearing into the fog. I stood on the deck until full darkness fell, thinking about mothers and daughters, about justice and mercy, about the price of truth and the cost of lies. Then I went inside to my typewriter. The page was still in the roller, half finished. The manuscript was growing, a record of everything that had happened, from the Sunday brunch where I became invisible to the courtroom where I became visible again. I sat down and placed my fingers on the keys. People ask me if I won, I typed. If destroying my daughter's life and sending my son-in-law to prison counts as victory. I don't have a good answer. I didn't set out to win. I set out to survive. To refuse erasure. To prove that truth matters even when the people you love want it buried. I wasn't writing an ending. I was recording a resurrection. Outside, the ocean continued its eternal rhythm. The fog pressed against the windows. And somewhere in Los Angeles, my daughter was learning to catalog books in the library her father had built. The phoenix had risen from ashes. What remained now was not victory or vindication, but something quieter and more profound, the simple, defiant act of continuing to exist. I was Jamie Mirren. I was 72 years old. And I was no longer invisible. I pulled the page from the typewriter, added it to the growing stack, and began a new one. There were still stories to tell. And this time, I would be the one telling them. True strength isn't about how loud you can shout. It's about knowing the precise moment to make your move and having the discipline to wait for it. I didn't want revenge. I wanted accountability. Sometimes the most profound act of love for oneself and even for others is to finally and decisively balance the books. What would you have done in my position? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And please like and subscribe if you believe that true respect is something that must be earned.